Hello and welcome back to AF Anime. I am John and we are back again with another Dragon Ball chapter review, this time of chapter 80, which is titled Gas vs. Granola Part 2. And as a heads up for those of you who are returning to this channel, this is going to be another short, more discussion heavy review, seeing as how this chapter is very satisfying in terms of the action we get to see. However, it does take a back seat when it comes to the information or the knowledge that we gain from reading this chapter and the dialogue. So with that being said, we can go ahead and get into the recap portion of this review, where we see that the first 10 or so pages are dedicated to picking up where we left off, which is more or less Granola beating the piss out of Gas using some of the new abilities that he's gotten since he had his power up with the Dragon Balls. And of these new abilities, the one that is flexed the most throughout this chapter is actually the clone technique, which he seems to use a little bit more creatively than we've seen in the previous chapters. Not that it matters too much, because as we see throughout the chapter that Granola is actually losing his advantage against Gas as time progresses. Also, another thing worth mentioning is the fact that the writers seem to have also forgotten about Oatmeal's role in this whole fight. I mean, when Oatmeal was reintroduced into this whole situation, you kind of got the feeling that Oatmeal was going to play a much bigger role in helping to defeat Gas. Well, that's definitely something they're going to be saving for later, or something they just totally forgot about, so that way they can kind of keep this chapter more action-based. In any case, the clone-based shenanigans go on for quite a while throughout this chapter, at least a good 5 to 10 pages or so, before Gas uses a technique that kind of shoots energy swords or beams out of his fingertips, and he manages to stab all of the remaining clones. Now, as any longtime Dragon Ball fan already knows, the clone technique basically revolves around splitting or separating your power into a divided portion for each clone. Now, I will say one thing about this chapter's fight that kind of is interesting is the fact that we see Granola use that in his strategy. He splits up his clones, divides his energy, Gas catches onto that, but he fizzles out his clones right at the point of attacking with a critical attack. I mean, ultimately, it's kind of a simple concept when you think about it, but it's just not something we've seen throughout Dragon Ball. Although we've seen the likes of Piccolo, Krillin, Goku, Tien, we've seen a lot of people use the clone technique, but not quite in this intelligent capacity. So I really just kind of wanted to bring that up because it was a cool new spin on an old technique that kind of surprised me, actually, that we haven't seen it up until this point. Moving on though, the attack is successful and manages to blast Gas off into the distance and into a body of water, to the point of which his siblings need to come and rescue him from drowning. And it's at this point that LX shows up and gives a very short inspirational speech to his younger brother before he removes the fang-based headgear that Gas has been wearing this entire time. And apparently that was some form of power restriction, which isn't terribly different from the Z Broly movie, where Broly is wearing that necklace which seems to keep his power or his rage in check. Either way, once this limit has been removed, we get to see a new, more animalistic and apparently electrical based form from Gas. And although this is an anime channel, I'm sure there's going to be some overlap from you viewers who have seen the Street Fighter franchise or play the Street Fighter franchise. In particular, there is one character who kind of really seems to have fit the bill for the inspiration for this form of Gas, which that character is going to be Blanca, of course. So for those of you who don't know, Blanca is a older Street Fighter character from the Super Nintendo era who is a green, beastly looking humanoid who has the ability to manipulate electricity around his body. I mean, it's a quirky gaming reference, I suppose, but moving on with the chapter, Gas actually proceeds to beat the mess out of Granola using his unhinged abilities, and it's a rather entertaining fight, I suppose, in terms of its manga form, and I think that it'll translate to a much more entertaining fight or entertaining scene once it's animated. Moving on though, we do see that Manito has the opportunity to give us some good exposition, but he totally drops that ball by informing Goku and Vegeta that although he did see that form before, he was unconscious when Bardock defeated it. And I suppose this is just another repeated trope from a previous chapter where Manito sets us up for exposition and then is just disappointing in what he reveals or what he tells us. So that does lead into a Bardock flashback, but first we see that Granola is having a real hard time maintaining his emotions and his actions, as he not only bashes his head into a boulder, he also manages to attack his siblings before he randomly beats the shit out of Vegeta. And this is both funny and ironic to me because it was just kind of out of nowhere, but at the same time we just saw that Vegeta had his wounds healed at the beginning of this chapter. So Gas gets a few really good hits in on Vegeta, but doesn't manage to do any real serious damage because Goku, old Captain Save-A-Bro, flies in there and tries to interrupt the attack. And in doing so, he manages to trigger some mental trauma that Bardock laid down on Gas in the past. As when Goku initially connects with his attack, it shows a mirror image or near mirror image of an attack that Bardock seemed to hit Gas with in the past. And this was another one of the highlights of the chapter for me, not just the flashback in particular. I have my issues with that, which I'll mention here in a moment, but the one thing I thought was cool was a bit of a different feel when we see that Gas was kind of instantly traumatized or re-traumatized with some PTSD that was laid down by Bardock decades earlier. Now, this kind of reaction isn't something that's entirely new. We did actually get to see it way back in the past when Frieza had a flashback of Goku giving him an ass whooping when he was dealing with Trunks. So ultimately, I don't know if this is a callback, but it is a more interesting point of this chapter in terms of its writing capability. And speaking of the writing, we do get a very brief 2-page flashback of the fight between Bardock and Gas, and that image of Bardock is one of the coolest images of Bardock that I've seen in a manga based property. However, there are some major details that they are slacking on. For instance, his tail is missing. Now, I suppose they can retroactively go back and say that maybe he lost it somehow during the fight or it was cut off or something to that effect, but I think this is just one of the cases of them not really paying attention to detail in terms of how much effort they put into the artwork or the thought of this chapter. I mean, ultimately, it's not super uncommon. We know that in the past, especially in regards to characters like Trunks and Goten, Akira Toriyama has flat out stated that he's forgotten the tale. But for me, at least, this panel right here of Bardock is one of the best panels in the chapter, but it's just kind of marred by that one forgotten detail. I mean, there is more about this flashback that actually manages to get on my nerves, but more on that here in a couple minutes. For now, we'll finish up the recap, and this chapter reaches its conclusion with Gas still freaking out about his Bardock flashback. When we see that Alex shows up, gives him a very short inspirational speech / reminder of his promise not to lose, and then we see Gas regain his consciousness and his facilities. And as he does so, he also manages to manifest clothing out of thin air, which seems to be a hidden ability of many characters throughout the Dragon Ball franchise. In any case, that wraps up the chapter with Gas getting his new power up, his new form, his new menacing look, alongside the very scant amount of character growth required for him to get beyond this racial handicap of not being able to control their unrestrained power. Now, overall, I'm going to give this chapter a 7.5. Ultimately, the artwork was just fine. It's just the lack of information and the scant amount of story that we get and the increasingly repeated dialogue that we're getting throughout these past couple chapters is just really starting to wear on my nerves a bit. So, I mean, in all, this is probably one of my least favorite chapters that I've seen from Dragon Ball Super in maybe a good 10 chapters or so, but I think they're still gearing up to progress this story or this plot a little bit further beyond Gas being the bad guy. Now, as we're seeing more of Alec, even though we still don't know exactly why he's there or what he intended to do with his errand, or if he even accomplished that errand, I can't help but get the feeling that his increasing, seriousness throughout this whole situation is giving me the impression that he might be the ultimate big bad of this series, or the final fighter that our Z Warriors and possibly even Granola need to face off against. And another thing I think is worth pointing out that is really starting to piss me off about this arc is the broken up nature of the Bardock based flashbacks. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure they want to think it out well and pace it out to where, they can incorporate Gas, his abilities, his history, and spread it out throughout a few chapters while still showing us the whole incident between him and Bardock. But I can't help but feel like they're really just stretching it out as far as they can at this point. Like, we keep getting Minato bringing up Bardock, but then failing to fill us in on the whole point of him being brought up within the context of those chapters. Now, I know they have the potential to kind of clean this up narratively and have it play out as a much more smooth flashback when it comes to the anime, and maybe that's something they'll improve upon once we get there, but just for now, I feel like I need to point out how much this is irritating me to have bits and pieces of an important flashback or of an incredibly important character, and then have it also marred by the fact that they're missing details like his tail and some of these amazing panels that we're getting from a character that we've never really gotten a good canon manga introduction to. So ultimately, it does seem like within these past couple chapters, the story and the detail for the characters and their interactions have kind of taken a backseat to giving us some action or some fuel for the anime to impress us with, you know, some really cool fights. But I also have to point out the narrative backtracking they're doing when it comes to things like Oatmeal helping Granola in this fight, as well as Gas using his weapon-based abilities because he was so unfamiliar with the new techniques that he had learned while becoming the universe's strongest fighter. So we got a whole month to speculate as to where the next chapter is going to go. It'll be interesting to say the least because Goku, apparently Granola, and Vegeta all seem to be fairly spent, but we also don't know what Alec is up to. It seems that he is becoming much more of a serious and a much more conniving character as time progresses. So that is going to do it for the January chapter review for Dragon Ball Super 80, Gas vs. Granola Part 2. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think Alec's errand was. Do you think he used the Dragon Balls again since they don't have a cooldown time like Earth's Dragon Balls? Do you think that he went to accomplish something else? Also, let me know your thoughts down below, what you think Frieza might be up to or when you think he might make his appearance, if at all, throughout this arc. In any case, I am John from AF Anime. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. If you'd like to see more Dragon Ball related content, please like, share, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. I will see you guys soon with another Dragon Ball related video, probably continuing my movie playlist. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.